Maya woke up early that morning as she always did, with the sound of the alarm echoing softly in her small room. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and a faint chill lingered in the air. She rubbed her eyes and stretched, taking a moment to gather herself before starting the long day ahead. Her life was simple, quiet, and at times exhausting. But it was the life she had learned to live with dignity and patience. The tiny room she rented was modest, with barely enough space for a bed and a small dresser. But she liked it that way. It was hers. She found comfort in her little corner of the world. After quickly washing her face and brushing her hair, Maya prepared a simple breakfast. She didn't have much, just bread and a bit of tea. But she always ate carefully, savoring the quiet moments before the day's work began. Her mind wandered briefly to her younger sister, who was still asleep, dreaming perhaps of a better future. Maya smiled softly at the thought and promised herself she would continue to do everything she could to support her sister's dreams. Even if her own life was hard, she had purpose, and that kept her moving. By the time she arrived at the mansion where she worked, the first light of dawn was creeping over the horizon. The large gates opened slowly as the driver let her in, and she walked up the driveway with the steady rhythm of someone used to hard work. The mansion was grand, almost intimidating in its size and beauty, with tall pillars, wide windows, and gardens that seemed to stretch endlessly. Maya, however, didn't let the grandeur distract her. She knew her role, and she accepted it without complaint. The staff were already moving about, preparing the house for the day. Some nodded at Maya in greeting, though most avoided her gaze. There were subtle ways people showed their superiority, and Maya had learned to read them all. A cold word here, a smirk there, things meant to remind her of her place. She didn't let it bother her. Instead, she focused on her tasks, finding quiet satisfaction in doing them well. She started in the kitchen, cleaning and arranging everything with care. Even small things mattered to her. A polished counter, neatly stacked plates, a fresh bouquet of flowers in the vase, these were her victories. Small but meaningful as the morning wore on. Maya moved from room to room, performing her duties with quiet efficiency. She dusted the furniture, swept the floors, and made sure the household ran smoothly. The other staff members often whispered behind her back, commenting on her clothes, her modest appearance, or the way she spoke, but Maya never engaged. She had learned long ago that dignity meant keeping one's head high and heart steady, regardless of how others treated you. The mansion's owner, a man of immense wealth and influence, rarely interacted with Maya directly. He had assistants and managers to handle most things, and the helpers were just that, helpers. But sometimes, the briefest interactions left a mark. One day, while cleaning the library, Maya had accidentally knocked over a stack of important papers. The assistant in charge had scolded her sharply, and the owner had walked in at just that moment. He hadn't spoken, only glanced at her with an indifferent gaze, and that look lingered in her mind long after. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was something colder, almost a mix of curiosity and dismissal. Maya had nodded quietly and apologized, then carried on with her work. That was her way. She never fought back with words, only with silent resilience and steadfast dedication. Lunch came quietly in the servants' quarters. Maya sat alone, eating the simple meal she had brought from home. The others chatted among themselves, sometimes throwing glances her way, sometimes ignoring her entirely. She didn't mind the isolation. In fact, she cherished it. It gave her time to think, to plan, to dream. She thought of her sister, of the small improvements she could make to their home, and even of little pleasures. She allowed herself a new book, a brief walk in the park, or a quiet moment of music. These small joys gave her strength, a shield against the daily reminders of her place in the world. In the afternoon, the mansion buzzed with activity. Preparations for an evening event kept everyone on their toes. Maya moved through the hallways like a shadow, unnoticed but essential. She arranged flowers, polished silverware, and straightened the cushions on the chairs. She found a rhythm in the chaos, a sense of purpose that no one could take from her. Even when the younger staff sneered or made cutting remarks, she kept her calm. Their words were sharp, but they could not touch the core of who she was. She knew her value, even if no one else did. Maya often thought about the people who judged her, the ones who looked down on her simply because of her position. She tried not to let bitterness grow, for she had seen too much of that in the world. Instead, she held on to a quiet hope. She believed that life had a way of balancing itself, of showing people the strength and worth of those they overlooked. She didn't know when it would happen or how, but she carried that belief in her heart. It was a small flame, but it kept her warm. By late afternoon, the mansion began to calm as preparations wound down. Maya checked each room carefully, ensuring everything was in place. The chandeliers sparkled, the tables gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers. She stood for a moment in the center of the grand hall, taking in the fruits of her labor. No one had thanked her yet that day, but she didn't need it. There was pride in knowing she had done her best, in seeing the beauty of the house reflect her effort. She smiled softly, brushing her hands together, in a quiet satisfaction that was entirely her own. As evening approached, Maya prepared for the final tasks of the day. She tidied the kitchen, made sure the staff uniforms were neat, and checked that the doors and windows were secure. The mansion seemed to settle around her, a quiet acknowledgement of the day's work. She paused for a moment near a window, looking out at the gardens bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The world outside seemed vast and full of possibilities. And for a brief second, she allowed herself to dream of something more. The first part of her day was ending, but Maya's journey was far from over. She carried with her the strength built from years of unnoticed work, the quiet determination that had kept her moving forward despite the judgment of others. She didn't yet know that today would bring a change, that the routine she had followed for years was about to be interrupted by something unexpected. But even in her ordinary life, she remained extraordinary in her courage, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in herself. And so, as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the horizon, Maya took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. She had learned that life might be hard, and people might look down on her. But her dignity, her effort, and her heart were things no one could ever take away. She moved forward quietly, carrying her hope like a hidden treasure, unaware that the day ahead would mark the beginning of a story that no one would ever expect. The morning was unusually quiet when Maya arrived at the mansion the next day. The air was thick with mist, and a soft drizzle fell, making the driveway slippery. She carefully stepped out of the car, balancing her tray of cleaning supplies, and felt a chill run down her spine. Even in the calm, familiar routine, there was a sense of something different in the air. The staff were busy as always, preparing for the day, but there was an unusual tension. She noticed the other helpers whispering among themselves, casting occasional glances at the grand front door, and she instinctively wondered what had changed. She moved to the kitchen, her steps quiet, her mind focused. Breakfast needed to be ready, and the early tasks demanded her attention. As she arranged the silverware and polished the counters, a sudden crash echoed from the hallway. Her heart jumped, and she dropped the rag she was holding. She rushed toward the sound, finding the young billionaire heir, Armin, slipping on the wet marble floor. He had come in without warning, carrying a heavy briefcase, completely unaware of the slick tiles. Without thinking, Maya lunged forward and grabbed his arm, steadying him before he could fall. The briefcase clattered to the ground, papers spilling out. But he was safe. Armand looked up at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude on his face. For the first time, Maya noticed the sharp features of his face, the intensity of his eyes, and the way he seemed out of place in the chaos of the morning. He straightened himself, brushing off his expensive suit, and for a moment they just looked at each other in silence. The staff who had gathered nearby gasped quietly, as if shocked that someone of his stature could be so vulnerable and yet be caught by someone they deemed beneath notice. Maya felt a flush of embarrassment. But she didn't step back. She was used to being overlooked, but this moment was different. Armin's gaze held a curiosity that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. He muttered a quiet thank you, his voice almost gentle, and Maya simply nodded, her heart racing, but her composure intact. She quickly began helping him gather the scattered papers, her hands moving efficiently, her mind alert. As they worked together, Armand noticed how methodical and careful she was, Every piece of paper was placed back neatly, every item returned to its place. He observed the way she moved with quiet confidence, how her eyes scanned the room, taking in details that others might miss. It was a subtle elegance, a strength that didn't need to be announced but could not be ignored. He found himself silently admiring her, something he had never done before with anyone in his world. When the papers were finally organized, Armand straightened up and looked at her again. "You have a steady hand," he said, his tone almost teasing, but with a note of sincerity. Maya blinked, caught off guard by the remark. Compliments were rare in her life, especially from someone like him. She mumbled a soft thank you, unsure of how to respond. Feeling a warmth in her chest that was entirely new, the morning continued, but something had shifted. Armand found reasons to stay in the room, asking small questions about the household, watching her with interest. Maya, despite herself, felt a sense of nervous excitement. She had never been the focus of attention in such a way, and it was both thrilling and frightening. She reminded herself to stay grounded, to continue with her work. But she couldn't ignore the subtle connection forming between them. Throughout the day, Maya went about her tasks with the same diligence, but now there was a sense of awareness in the air. Armin would occasionally pass by, giving her a small nod or a fleeting smile. The other staff noticed it too, whispering among themselves, speculating about what could be happening. Maya paid them no mind. She had long learned that their opinions held little weight. What mattered was her integrity, her work, and the tiny flickers of recognition she now received from someone who had always seemed untouchable. During lunch, Maya retreated to the quiet corner she usually claimed. She sat down with her simple meal, feeling the drizzle tapping gently against the windows. Armand appeared shortly after, carrying a small plate. He had taken the initiative to bring her some food, a gesture so unexpected that Maya felt her throat tighten. She looked up at him, eyes wide, and he offered a small, shy smile. "I thought you might like this," he said. It was such a simple act, yet it spoke volumes. A kindness that contrasted sharply with the often cold and judgmental world she inhabited. Their conversation was minimal at first. Small talk about the weather, the work, and the upcoming events in the mansion. But gradually, they began to share more. Armand spoke about his day, the pressures of his business responsibilities, the weight of expectations, and the loneliness that often accompanied his life. Maya listened quietly, offering gentle words of understanding. And in return, she spoke of her sister, her hopes for the future, and the small joys that made her life meaningful despite the hardships. There was a mutual respect forming, connection built on sincerity and shared humanity. As the afternoon unfolded, Armand found himself watching Maya more closely. He noticed the subtle way she carried herself, the patience in her actions, and the kindness that radiated from her even in the most mundane tasks. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply existed with grace and dignity. It was captivating. He realized that in a world filled with wealth, power, and pretense, her authenticity was a rare and precious thing. Meanwhile, Maya remained unaware of the effect she was having. She continued her work, tending to the mansion with the same meticulous care. She arranged flowers in the drawing room, polished the silver trays for the evening, and ensured that every corner of the house reflected order and cleanliness. Yet she felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. There was an unspoken acknowledgement from Armand, a quiet attention that made her work feel seen and appreciated. It was a feeling she had longed for, but never dared to expect. By late afternoon, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the mansion began preparing for the evening event. Maya moved through the rooms, checking and double-checking details, while Armin occasionally followed, asking for her input on minor arrangements. The staff whispered in disbelief, watching the billionaire take interest in someone they considered beneath attention. Maya ignored their murmurs, focusing on her duties. But she couldn't help but notice the subtle smiles that occasionally flickered across Armand's face. It was as if he found joy in the simplicity of her presence, a contrast to the complexity and rigidity of his usual surroundings, as the day drew to a close. Maya felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The mansion was ready, everything in its place, and the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Armin lingered for a moment, standing near her, and for a brief instant, their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding, shared acknowledgement of the moment that had passed, and the connection that was growing between them. Neither spoke, yet the silence was filled with meaning. Maya didn't yet know that this day. This simple morning that began with a slip and a catch would mark the beginning of a significant change in her life. The quiet, unnoticed helper who had always moved through the world with humility and care had captured the attention of someone whose life was vastly different, someone whose recognition carried weight and significance she had never imagined. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what it might mean to be seen, truly seen, by someone from a world she had only observed from the periphery. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the mansion settled into the evening, Maya cleaned the last of the rooms, her hands tired, but her spirit unexpectedly lifted. She paused for a moment by the window, watching the rain-soaked gardens glisten in the fading light. She breathed deeply, feeling a sense of hope and anticipation she hadn't allowed herself in years. The day had started like any other, but it had ended with a quiet magic. A shift that promised something new, something unexpected, and something profoundly human. And so, Maya continued her work, unaware of how the small, ordinary actions of that morning had planted the seeds of change. She moved through the mansion with her usual grace and determination, carrying with her a new sense of possibility. A sense that life, even in its simplest forms, could surprise and transform in ways she had never imagined. The days following the rainy morning continued in a way that Maya had never expected. There was an undercurrent of change in the mansion, subtle yet unmistakable. Armin seemed to find reasons to be near her more often. Sometimes it was asking for her opinion on arrangements. Other times it was simply sharing a cup of tea while she polished the silverware. The gestures were small, almost casual, but for Maya, they carried a weight she could not ignore. She found herself looking forward to these brief encounters, feeling a spark of something new, something alive. In her usually quiet and routine days, Maya's work remained as demanding as ever. She moved from room to room, making sure everything was perfect for the evening events, tidying, cleaning, and organizing with meticulous care. The other staff watched her quietly, noticing the change in her demeanor. She seemed lighter somehow, more confident, though she still spoke softly and carried herself with humility. They whispered among themselves, casting judgmental glances at Armand, who had started to seek her out more openly. Some were incredulous that he would pay attention to someone they considered beneath notice. Others were quietly curious, wondering if Maya had somehow done something remarkable to earn his interest. But Maya paid little attention to the whispers. Her focus remained on her work, on doing it well, and on understanding the quiet connection that was slowly growing between her and Armand. One afternoon, Armand found her in the greenhouse, tending to the plants. She was kneeling on the floor, carefully wiping the leaves and adjusting the pots. The soft light filtering through the glass gave the room a calm, almost magical quality. Armand watched her for a moment, admiring the way she moved. How gently she treated the fragile plants as if they mattered more than anything else in the world. He cleared his throat softly, and Maya looked up, startled but smiling politely. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Armand said, though his eyes were full of warmth. Maya shook her head, stepping back to give him room. "It's all right," she replied softly. "The plants need care every day. It's easy to forget when there's so much else going on." Armand nodded, crouching down slightly to examine a small flower she had been tending. "You have a way of making everything look alive," he said, "even in places most people wouldn't notice." Maya felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks. Compliments like this were rare, especially from someone so different from her world. She smiled gently. "I just try to do what I can," she said. "Sometimes it's small, but it makes a difference." They worked together in silence for a few moments, tending to the plants and arranging them neatly. The quiet companionship was comforting, a new kind of connection that felt natural and easy. Maya felt a subtle warmth in her chest, a sense that someone in this vast, complex world had truly seen her for who she was. Armand, too, felt a growing admiration for her patience, her dedication, and the gentle strength she carried without fanfare. As the weeks passed, Armand began finding more excuses to speak with Maya. Sometimes he asked about household routines. Other times, he sought her opinion on things as simple as the placement of a vase or the arrangement of flowers. Each interaction brought them closer, though Maya remained careful not to overstep boundaries. She was used to being invisible, and the sudden attention made her cautious. Yet, despite her reservations, she felt a growing trust in him, a sense that he valued her not for her position but for her character. The other staff could not help but notice the developing connection. Whispers became more frequent, and some even tried to subtly discourage Maya from engaging with him. They made snide remarks, questioning why she was receiving such attention and implying that she should remain in her place. Maya heard some of the whispers, but she chose not to react. She had learned long ago that bitterness served no purpose, and she focused on her work and the quiet bond she shared with Armand. She knew that their interactions were genuine, and that mattered more than anything else. One evening, the mansion held a small gathering for close associates of the family. Maya was busy preparing the rooms, arranging decorations, and ensuring that everything was flawless. She moved through the hallways with her usual quiet efficiency, unaware that Armand had been watching her from a distance. When he approached, he offered her a soft smile, a silent acknowledgement of her hard work. The other staff looked on with barely concealed surprise. No one had expected the billionaire to engage with her so openly, yet he did, treating her with respect and warmth that set her apart from the judgment and indifference of others. During the gathering, Armand found himself returning to Maya's side repeatedly. He asked questions about her life, her interests, and the little things that made her happy. Maya spoke cautiously, sharing pieces of her world of love for books, the satisfaction of a well-tended garden, the joy of helping her sister with schoolwork. Each story, each small detail, drew him closer, creating a bridge between two lives that seemed so different yet had found common ground. The conversation flowed naturally, with no pretense, no pressure, just a simple, genuine exchange of thoughts and feelings. Maya began to notice the way Armand listened, truly listened, to her words. It was unlike anyone she had met before. He didn't interrupt or dismiss her. He asked questions, showed interest, and respected her perspective. It was a rare gift, this kind of attention, and it filled her with a sense of validation and hope. She began to feel that perhaps life could hold surprises, that people could see beyond appearances and status, and that meaningful connections were possible even in unexpected places. The staff continued to whisper and speculate, some with envy, others with disbelief. But Maya's focus remained on her work and the subtle bond she shared with Armand. She found strength in the knowledge that their connection was built on authenticity, not superficiality. She moved through the mansion with a quiet confidence, aware of the change, but determined to remain grounded and true to herself. One afternoon, as Maya was arranging flowers in the main hall, Armand approached with a small package. He handed it to her with a gentle smile. "I thought you might like this," he said. Maya opened it carefully to find a book she had mentioned months ago, one she had longed to read but never had the chance to obtain. Her eyes widened in surprise and gratitude. "You remembered," she whispered, touched by the thoughtful gesture. Armand simply nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Some things are worth remembering," he said quietly. This small act deepened the connection between them. Maya felt seen and appreciated in a way she never had before. She realized that her quiet strength, her attention to detail, and her kindness had left an impression, not just on the mansion or the staff, but on someone whose world seemed entirely separate from hers. It was a subtle reminder that true recognition often comes from unexpected places. As the days turned into weeks, her interactions grew more natural and unguarded. They shared moments of laughter, quiet reflection, and gentle teasing. Armand began to confide in Maya more openly, speaking of the pressures he faced, the expectations placed upon him, and the loneliness that often accompanied wealth and status. Maya listened with empathy, offering support and understanding without judgment. In return, she found herself sharing more of her own life, the challenges she faced, and the small victories that gave her strength. The trust between them deepened, creating a bond that was both comforting and exhilarating. Despite the growing connection, Maya remained aware of the staff's scrutiny. Some continued to make remarks, attempting to undermine her confidence or question her place in the mansion. But she had learned resilience over the years. She focused on her work, on the moments of genuine connection with Armand, and on the quiet joy she found in being recognized for her character rather than her status. Each day reinforced her belief that true respect and admiration were earned through authenticity and dedication, not titles or wealth. One evening, as the mansion settled into quiet, Armand found Maya on the balcony, gazing at the gardens illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. He approached quietly, standing beside her without speaking. Maya felt the warmth of his presence, a comforting weight that made her feel safe and valued. They watched the gardens together in silence, the night air carrying the faint scent of flowers and rain. It was a simple moment, yet it held a depth of meaning neither could put into words. In that quiet companionship, they found a connection that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. As the night deepened, Maya reflected on the changes that had begun to shape her life. The quiet bond with Armand had brought new light into her routine, a sense of possibility she had long thought was beyond her reach. She realized that life, even in its simplest forms, could surprise and transform in ways she had never imagined. The unnoticed helper was beginning to understand that being seen, truly seen, was a gift, and that genuine connection could flourish in the most unexpected places. And so, as the mansion grew silent and the lanterns cast a soft glow across the gardens, Maya carried with her a quiet sense of hope and anticipation. She knew that the bond with Armand was growing stronger. The small gestures, shared moments, and mutual respect were weaving a story that would continue to unfold in surprising and meaningful ways. The ordinary days of routine and duty had given way to something extraordinary, a human connection that promised to change both their lives forever. The day of the large evening gathering arrived with a strange mix of excitement and tension. Maya felt it as soon as she walked through the gates of the mansion. The air seemed heavier, filled with quiet whispers and quick footsteps. Everyone was busy preparing for the event. Important guests were coming, people who mattered a great deal in the wealthy world that surrounded this house. Every small detail had to be perfect, and Maya was right in the center of it all. Moving quickly but calmly from room to room, she checked the flowers in the main hall, making sure each one looked fresh and bright. She adjusted the chairs, smoothed out the table covers, and polished the glassware until it shone. Even though her hands were busy, her mind kept drifting back to Armand. Over the past few weeks, their quiet moments together had become a part of her daily life. She didn't fully understand what was happening between them, but she knew it was real. Still, she reminded herself not to dream too far ahead. Her world and his were so different. She had learned the hard way not to expect too much from life. Armand arrived early that evening. He walked through the main hall, dressed in a neat suit, looking calm but thoughtful. His eyes searched the room until they found Maya near the staircase, carefully fixing a small decoration that had slipped out of place. When he saw her, something softened in his expression. He walked toward her without thinking about who might be watching. Maya noticed him from the corner of her eye, felt her heart beat a little faster. She tried to stay focused on her work, but she could feel his presence close by. "Everything looks good," he said quietly. "You always make this place feel warm, even when it's full of people." She smiled softly. "I just try to do my job well," she replied. "Big events can feel cold if no one adds a little care." Armand nodded, understanding her words more deeply than she might have known. He stayed near her for a moment longer, but then he was called away by one of his business guests. Maya watched him go, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. She knew this world was his, not hers. As the guests began to arrive, the mansion filled with voices, laughter, and the soft sound of music. People dressed in expensive clothes moved through the halls, greeting one another, talking about business, travel, and luxury. Maya moved quietly among them, offering drinks, guiding people to their seats, and making sure everything ran smoothly. Most of the guests barely noticed her. To them, she was just another helper, someone who blended into the background. But Armand noticed her. From across the room, his eyes kept finding her. He watched the way she spoke kindly to everyone, even those who looked at her with little respect. He saw her gentle smile, her calm way of handling every situation. In a room full of people who tried hard to look important, Maya was real. That was what drew him to her. Some of the staff had started to notice the way Armand looked at her. They whispered behind their hands, exchanging looks that were full of doubt and judgment. They did not understand what he saw in someone like Maya. To them, she was just a helper. But Armand saw much more. At one point, a guest dropped a glass on the floor and it shattered loudly. Everyone stepped back, annoyed by the mess. Maya quickly knelt down to clean it up before anyone could get hurt. As she did, she cut her finger slightly. It wasn't a deep cut, but a small line of blood appeared. Armand saw it and rushed toward her without caring who was watching. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "It's nothing," Maya said softly, trying to hide her hand. "Just a small cut." But Armand gently took her hand and asked someone to bring a clean cloth. The room had gone quiet. Guests stared. Staff froze. No one had ever seen him act this way toward a helper before. He carefully wrapped the cloth around her finger, his touch gentle and full of care. "You shouldn't ignore something like this," he said. "Even small things matter." Maya felt her face grow warm. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. "Thank you," she whispered. As they stood up, the silence in the room was thick. People were watching them closely now. Armand looked around and realized what was happening. For the first time, he saw the judgment in their eyes, the way they were silently questioning his actions. A part of him felt angry, another part felt strong. He looked back at Maya. She seemed nervous, her shoulders slightly tense, as if she expected someone to tell her she had done something wrong just by standing next to him. That look in her eyes touched something deep in his heart. Without thinking too much, Armand did something no one expected. He stepped closer to her. The music played softly in the background. The guests watched in silence. The staff held their breath. Armand gently lifted Maya's chin so she would look at him. Her eyes were wide with surprise, but they were also full of trust. And then, in front of everyone, he placed a soft, respectful kiss on her lips. It was not loud or dramatic. It was simple, warm, and full of meaning. Gasps filled the room. Some guests whispered in shock. Others stared, unable to believe what they had just seen. The helper everyone had looked down on was being kissed by the billionaire. Maya stood frozen for a moment. Her heart was racing. She had never imagined something like this could happen to her. A part of her was afraid, worried about what people would say, how they would treat her after this. But another part of her felt something she had never felt before. Chosen, Armand looked at her gently. "You don't deserve to be invisible," he said quietly. "You deserve to be seen." Tears filled Maya's eyes, but she held them back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. His words were enough. Some of the guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. The staff, who had always looked down on her, suddenly did not know where to look. The world they believed in. Where? Money and status decided a person's worth had just been shaken. Armand took Maya's hand. Not tightly, not to pull her anywhere, but just to let her know he was there. "Come," he said softly. "Let's get some fresh air." They walked toward the balcony, leaving behind the shocked room. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet. The city lights glowed in the distance. Maya finally felt her breath return. "I'm sorry if that caused trouble," she said quietly. "I never wanted to make things hard for you." Armand shook his head. "You didn't cause anything," he replied. "People caused it by forgetting what really matters. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel." Maya looked down at the garden below. "I'm just a helper," she said softly. "No," Armand replied. "You're a kind, strong person who deserves respect. That is more important than any title." They stood there for a long moment, letting the noise of the party fade behind them. For Maya, the world felt different now. Scary maybe, but also full of new hope. Inside the mansion, people were still talking. The kiss had changed everything. Some would judge, some would gossip. But something important had already happened. Maya was no longer invisible. The days after the gathering felt very different inside the mansion. It was as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened. People walked more slowly. Voices were quieter. Eyes followed Maya wherever she went. Some of the staff looked confused, some looked curious, and some still looked unhappy. But one thing was clear, nothing was the same anymore. Maya woke up each morning with mixed feelings. A part of her was still afraid. She worried about what people would say, how they would treat her, and whether Armand would change his mind. Another part of her felt something new, something strong. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her in front of everyone. That was not something she could forget. When she arrived at work, she noticed small changes right away. Some of the staff who used to ignore her now nodded when they passed. A few even smiled, others avoided her, unsure of how to act. Maya stayed the same. She did her work quietly, cleaned the rooms, arranged the flowers, and helped wherever she was needed. She did not try to act different, because she was still the same person inside. Armand made sure to see her every day. Sometimes it was just a short conversation in the hallway. Sometimes it was sitting together for a few minutes during a break. He did not hide his kindness. He spoke to her with respect, asked how she was feeling, and listened when she spoke. That alone changed how people looked at her. When someone with power shows respect, others start to follow. One afternoon, Maya was cleaning a quiet sitting room when Armand came in. He sat down across from her and watched her work for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Maya paused and nodded. "I think so," she said. "Things are just different." He smiled softly. "Different can be good." She looked at him, her eyes full of honest feeling. "I don't want special treatment," she said. "I just want to be treated like a normal person." "You deserve that," Armand replied. "You always did." Slowly, the mansion began to change. It did not happen all at once. But little by little, the way people treated Maya became kinder. The younger helpers no longer made rude comments. Supervisors spoke to her with more respect. Some of the guests who visited even greeted her politely. Having heard about the moment that shocked everyone, but not everyone was happy. There were a few people who felt angry. They believed Maya did not belong in Armand's world. They whispered and tried to create problems. But Armand did not listen to them. He knew what he felt, and he trusted his heart. One day, he invited Maya to walk with him in the garden. It was a simple place with trees, flowers, and stone paths. It felt peaceful compared to the busy mansion. "I want you to know something," he said as they walked. "I don't see you as someone below me. I see you as someone beside me." Maya stopped walking and looked at him. Her eyes were full of emotion. "I've never had anyone say that to me before," she said. "You should have," he replied. "You've always had value." They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other. There was no rush, no pressure, only quiet understanding. Maya still continued her work at the mansion. She did not stop being helpful. She did not forget where she came from. She remembered the days when no one noticed her. Those memories kept her humble and kind. Armand began to involve her more in small decisions. He asked her opinion about the house, the garden, even about some of the events. He valued her thoughts because he knew they came from honesty, not from wanting to impress. Some guests started to notice her too. They saw how calm and thoughtful she was. A few even asked her questions, curious about her life. Maya answered, politely, never trying to make herself look better than she was. That simple honesty made people respect her even more. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the mansion, Maya shared something that had always been close to her heart. "I just want a simple life," she said. "I want my sister to have a good future. I want to feel safe and respected." Armand listened closely. "Those are beautiful dreams," he said. "Were worth fighting for." Over time, the story of what happened that night spread beyond the mansion. People talked about how a helper had been treated with kindness and respect by someone powerful. It made others think about how they treated people in their own lives. Maya's world was still not perfect. There were still hard days. There were still people who judged. But she was no longer alone. One day, Armin asked her to sit with him in a quiet room. He looked serious but calm. "I don't want you to feel trapped here," he said. "If you ever want to leave this job and do something else, I will support you." Maya was surprised. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Because caring about someone means wanting them to be happy, he replied. Tears filled her eyes. I've never had anyone care about my happiness before, she said. You do now, he said gently. Maya didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know where her path would lead. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer invisible. She was still the same helper who worked hard and cared deeply. But now, she was also someone who was loved, respected, and seen, and that made all the difference.